Okay, welcome to the last session of the day. We heard a couple of really good presentations today in this app dev track. First of all, there was a great presentation from IP Australia about the 8 steps to support cloud native development. It was awesome. Thanks, Jeff. Then Tom and Mandy gave a great overview of API-centric Agile integration and the value of upgrading and maintaining your integration platform. We heard then from our partners, AWS, Leonardo as well, just now about orchestration of microservices using a BPM approach. And quite interesting as well, obviously, the roadmap. So what's new in OpenShift and what's coming. So last session of the day will be about how you can modernize your applications by moving applications and processes to the cloud. A few words about myself. My name is Daniel Soffner. I'm a Senior Solution Architect working for Red Hat, based in Melbourne. And I often get the question, why did you choose to become an architect, an IT architect, right? Because you could have headed to sales, for example, right, to make some money, or engineering or marketing. Now, I personally think that being an IT architect is probably the most creative role in IT. Because I go to customers, I talk to them, I hear about their plans, their aspirations, also their challenges. And then I take a piece of paper and I draw up a roadmap or an architecture, for example, right? So it's a bit like creating music, and that's pretty close to my heart as well, because I'm a trained pianist. I make music sort of on the side and release them on Apple Music and Spotify. So I put my Twitter handle up there. If you decide to follow me, I'll keep you up to date on 2 things. First of all the news around what we are doing in Red Hat, around new technologies. And I'll keep you up to date on my latest album releases as well. I'm very happy to get any feedback from you. Okay, let's get started. Before I get started, I would like to ask you a question. So if you had to count the number of applications that you're currently hosting in your organization, what would be the total number? So if you can spend 10 or 20 seconds maybe to think about that. It's pretty difficult, right? Is it 5 or 10? Is it 20, 30? If you're a smaller company, is it 100 maybe? And it's difficult because of various reasons. First of all, the boundaries of your complex applications can be quite hard to maintain, right? If you have a mainframe system, for example, do you count this as one system, or do you count all of the applications that are running on that mainframe? You have some core functions that sit in various areas of your enterprise, right? Rules, for example, they can sit on a spreadsheet. They can sit in an ERP system, for example, or you can centralize them in a business rules management system. So how do you count those functions? And then there's shadow IT, right? All of those systems and applications that are critical for the business and critical for your end users, but that are not officially supported. So if we look at the spectrum of enterprise applications, that's pretty much the reality that we're seeing these days, and probably will be for some time to come. You have a mixture of custom applications across a broad spectrum of technologies, because there's not really a one-size-fits-all solution, right, for any capability. So if you start here on the left, you've got your Java applications that are running on a Java app server. It has been running there maybe for 20 years, very critical to the business. You may have some applications that are using a .NET framework. You may have some newer applications here to the right that are using newer frameworks such as Reactive, Vertex, for example, or Spring Boot. And maybe you've already started to venture out into the serverless world and have some trials around running serverless on a public cloud provider. So these are just the custom-built applications. Now let's look at the commercial off-the-shelf applications, right? I'm sure you have an ERP system like SAP. You have a CRM application that is running on-premise as well. You have supply chain management, enterprise content management, all the systems that run your, let's say, your internet presence, right? Now these have to be integrated as well somehow, and usually most of our customers are doing that through an ESP or a centralized enterprise integration platform that has grown over the years, that is relatively expensive to maintain as well, right? And it is usually run by a centralized COC, or Center of Competency. Now, ESBs, as we heard earlier from Tom and Mandy, are quite common and still provide a lot of value for integrating on-premise applications. But how about if you want to integrate cloud applications? Is it still the right model? Right, and then finally, after looking at the commercial off-the-shelf applications and your custom applications, you have to look at people and processes, right? They're the ones who are interacting with your core workflows that drive core capabilities in your business, and that also have to be integrated into your backend systems. So if we look at retail, that's order management, for example, it's a critical process. If you look at a bank, for example, you have a loan origination process that is quite critical. And in insurance, a lot of the processes revolve around the claims processing side of things. Right, so you'll be probably saying now, yes, exactly, that's what it looks like in my organization as well. And still, I have a lot of IT vendors like Red Hat come up to me and tell me I need to modernize, right? And the question why we believe that you need to have a look at modernization applications is because the requirements for and the nature of modern applications are changing. They have been changing for a while now, very subtle first, but now it's quite apparent and quite visible. So let's have a look at those changes. So first of all, any enterprise capability has to be viewed in the context of three main factors. It's people, its platforms, and its processes. So if you look at people, for example, you have to ask yourself the questions: who are the internal consumers of your enterprise capabilities? Are you targeting any cultural change, maybe changes within your organization as well? Who are your external users, right? Your end clients and the end customers at the end of the day who are consuming your enterprise capabilities. So now we have to look at platforms, right? If you look at platforms, you have to ask yourself, who owns the decisions, the architectural decisions to roll out new capabilities, right? Who owns the digital transformation strategy? Is it the CIO? Is it the CIO, the CDO? Or is it a special project teams that is responsible for driving that? And then finally, if you look at processes, you look at it in two ways as well. First of all, you have to ask yourself, do your enterprise application actually support your core processes, the business processes and business rules? And from an IT operating model, what are the processes that you're planning to roll out? Do we have CI/CD in place, or Agile or DevOps? Now let's first have a look at people. So in the past, we've seen that organizations have really focused on building out centralized and standardized capabilities, usually by organizing them around COCs, a center of competency. Now this centralization has produced certain benefits, especially for reducing costs, but also it has become a bottleneck for speed to market, and also has pretty much contributed in stifling any sort of innovation, right? For example, if you want to roll out new capabilities on a public cloud, it has to go through the enterprise architect, and he or she may say, no, that's not part of our overall enterprise architecture framework. Or containers even. You may have the head of security telling you, okay, that is not safe enough or secure enough, right? So these sort of centralized functions have become somewhat of a bottleneck. So therefore, a lot of organizations have decided to move away from these centralized functions, these COCs, and more towards communities of practice that are a bit more decentralized and loosely coupled. So that's one thing that we've been observing. The other one has been the move to enabled teams. So enabled teams are usually ad hoc teams that are put together, consisting of technical teams and business teams that work together towards the goal of rolling out a new product or new capability. So once you've got the organization in place, you have a look at the processes, right? And a lot of customers, they look at moving away from sort of the more traditional waterfall type processes for an agile approach. They look at the DevOps models in place to foster integration between the development and operations teams. And then very importantly, especially for the development teams, they don't want to wait for weeks and months for a new VM to be provisioned, right? They want to get started with new technologies quite quickly. So automating the infrastructure using tools like Ansible is becoming a critical component in your IT operating model as well. And then you want to check out your workflows, right? And your core processes. And you want to look whether these processes are maybe too manual, right? You want to move at more of a straight-through processing type approach, right? In order to free up those resources to focus more on the high-value task. And at the same time, you want to have a look at business rules and at the question where you want to consolidate these business rules in a more centralized rules management system. Okay, so these are just your internal users, right? How about your external users? So we've seen earlier, and especially this morning in the keynote from Deloitte, that we live in an era of new channels. So up until 10 or 12 years ago, the only way that people were accessing the internet was through a computer and a web browser, pretty much. And then in 2007, we had the rise of the smartphones. So from now on, everybody's pretty much accessing the internet and core enterprise capabilities through smartphones or through tablets, any type of mobile device. So we've got other channels as well. Voice, for example, is another one. We work with a bank in the US called Capital One. They built, together with Red Hat, an application for the clients of Capital One, so they can access their core account details and banking details through the Amazon Echo or Amazon Alexa, a voice-controlled assistant, right? So we've got other channels as well. We've got, of course, the Internet of Things, as we saw today with Deloitte, smart TV, virtual reality or augmented reality. So very different channels that your end customers will be using to access sort of core functions and capabilities. And you've got to ask yourself whether your IT systems are enabled and ready to support these types of interactions. Right, then also the integration landscape is changing. So we saw earlier that an ESB is very well suited for on-premise application. But how about if you wanted to integrate external platforms, like SaaS platforms or partner platforms, for example, that sit outside of your network and outside of your organization? How about if you want to integrate external users, the end clients, customers that are using or interacting with your core capabilities through mobile devices and that are also sitting outside of your enterprise and outside of your organization? And then there's the problem of big data, right? So up until, again, 10, 15 years ago, the majority of data integration was done by integrating a relational database or a data warehouse that was sitting on premise. Nowadays, we're talking about streaming data, right? We're talking about very different formats, SQL data or NoSQL data, for example. We talk about a data lake, for example. That's what a lot of our customers are looking at as well. And that need to be integrated into the on-premise applications as well. So as you can see, it is key to have a look at modernization. So you may want to think about, again, to cater to different actors inside and outside of your organization. You want to take the channels into account that your end users are utilizing to access core capabilities. You want to have a look at automating your workflows and your business rules and go more towards a straight-through processing approach. And you want to have a look at modernizing your approach to integration that goes beyond just the on-premise integration. Okay, but what happens if you do not modernize? So you will see a lot of these names that were once a big name in the consumer world, like Compaq, Kodak, or Blockbuster, right? So they're no longer around because they waited too long. They did not see the disruption and the technical challenges in their particular industry and did not react to it properly, right? So an interesting statistic here from Gartner. So they found out that by 2023, about 90% of today's applications will have received insufficient funding for the modernization. Now that's a big number, 90%, and it will include a lot of core applications that are currently driving your business quite significantly. So it is critical that you look at those applications, that you look at, are they still up to date? Are they still providing the sort of core functions that you need to run your enterprise? And how can you start to modernize them? So now in the second half of this talk, let's have a look how we can help you actually to analyze your IT systems and come up with strategies how to modernize them. And we'll look at a few options here. So first of all, if you want to look at strategies, how you want to modernize your existing applications, and these are the custom applications that you built maybe 15, 20 years ago that are running on a Java application server, right? There's a few choices that you have. You can rehost, you can replatform, or you can refactor. So if you have smaller application or medium-sized applications, for example, that you are able to revise very quickly, they are usually good for a replatform or refactoring exercise. So you pretty much keep the core capabilities in place, but you add new functionalities, like an API layer, for example. So very different channels can access these capabilities through that API layer. So now the larger, more established apps, critical applications, they will take a bit longer to modernize, right? So you may want to be looking at a rehosting exercise first, and then incrementally start to change core capabilities inside of that application. So as an example, here on the left side, you have a large application. This is an example from, let's say, from e-commerce. So you have your services in there, your shopping cart service, your promotion, your rating service, your orders service, for example. It's all running on a fat ear file inside of a Java application server, right? So the first thing you want to be looking at is to break up that application, right, into smaller services, right? And run each of these services, as you see here on the right, separately as a microservice. You may want to think then about refactoring either all or at least some of these microservices using newer programming languages, right? Using things like Spring Boot or Vertex, for example, for the shopping cart because it's more event-driven. Or if you have a user interface, for example, that was built maybe 10, 20 years ago and is using technology like Java server pages, which doesn't really look good on a mobile phone, you maybe want to look at new frameworks like AngularJS for modernization. And then the last step is to redeploy these refactored microservices on a container platform, such as OpenShift. Now, as you can see here, that is a good approach, but it has a downside. Now, suddenly now you have all of these heterogeneous microservices, right, that need to communicate with each other. So in the old world, all of that was part of one application, so it was only an API call inside of that app. Now you have all of these services. They have to find each other, service discovery. There have to be any sort of requests between the services have to be routed in a dynamic manner. And the services have to be fault tolerant. So what now happens is the underlying network becomes a lot more critical for the communication between these services. And the developers bear the responsibility for the communication between services. Now, of course, the last thing you want to be doing is implement any sort of infrastructure code inside of the business service, right? The business services only have to support one function only, maybe the service that they were created for and built for. Now, in order to achieve a reliable communication between your services, we work with a technology called a service mesh. And as part of this track here, UpDev track, you heard about a service mesh a few times already in earlier presentations. So service mesh is pretty much a software infrastructure layer for controlling and monitoring internal service-to-service traffic in an application that is built on microservices. So instead of making the services themselves responsible for dealing with the communication, the platform underneath is responsible for that. And we're using here an approach, used in OpenShift, a container-based approach, by simply adding a proxy or a sidecar container to each service. And then the communication between the services is driven by these additional proxy containers. And on the right-hand side, you have a control plane that pretty much handles the communication and is enforcing the policies at runtime. Now, this is I think a pretty great architecture that a lot of the vendors are using, and we're currently rolling that out in OpenShift, and early next year, and believe in version 4.0, 4.1, it will be GA. And the technology that is underneath that is Istio, which is currently in a tech preview. Right, if we look at integration, right, we already saw earlier in the talk from Tom and Mandy that is critical to refresh and to modernize your integration platform. So it does not support just on-premise application, but also cloud applications and external users that sit outside of your network. So you can do this, first of all, by refactoring some of your integration flows using a microservices-based approach and using technologies such as Fuse and AMQ for the actual implementation. Then in the next step, you want to deploy your microservices very close to where those integration flows are actually needed, right? If you have some integration flows that you need to run in a public cloud, you want to have it run inside of a container in AWS or in any other cloud provider, right? Or you want to run it on-premise if you're using a container and microservices-based approach for your on-premise integration. And then finally, you want to expose a few of your functions or all of your functions as RESTful APIs, right? Now, as we've seen earlier, APIs are very good for abstracting away the underlying implementation, right? It is that stable, reusable, standard user interface that you can use to expose your core services and core functions. So if we go back to an earlier slide where you saw the different channels so suddenly accessing your core capabilities, you want to have that standard in place that you can actually respond to the request coming from these different channels. And I think APIs are a great value to do that. And 3Scale is pretty much our solution in that space to run and manage your APIs. And then from a process point of view, we said earlier that, again, it is critical for your workflows and business processes to support straight-through processing, right? You want to have 80–90% of your process steps automated, and only 10% or maybe 20% of the steps are actually human tasks that your internal end users are utilizing. So you want to have a platform in place on which those workflows are running as well. You want to do this by building process applications that are modern, by introducing maybe some of those processes that are more event-driven as part of a case management solution. You want to have UIs in place as well that your end users and business users are utilizing on their phone and in a web browser, any type of channel at the end of the day. And you want to cater to different personas inside of your organization as well, because very different users have different requirements to interact with your processes. Now we have a solution for that, this Process Automation Manager, and we learned about that a little earlier in the conversation or in the presentation from Leonardo. So process automation is pretty much our solution that allows you to build and deploy your end-to-end workflows and your rules underneath the covers as well. So it is an embedded BPM and rules management system. Okay, the key takeaways from today, how can you modernize your business? So you want to first have a look at modernizing your applications. So pretty much the applications that have been running inside of your organization for a long time, and make them resilient using technologies such as Istio or Service Mesh. You want to accelerate cloud integration through agile integration, right? Through containers, and microservices, and APIs. And again, our tools and our solutions in that space can help you. You want to engage your people, right? By having a look at restructuring some of your teams and creating engaged teams and communities of practice and seeing how that makes you a lot more agile. And lastly, you want to have a look at your workflows and your core processes and how you can automate them through straight processing. Okay, next steps. We're happy to talk to you about a variety of topics. So we do have workshops in place that take a full day. It's mostly targeted at your developers. You walk through hands-on labs around app transformation and agile integration. So feel free to talk to us now at the network function, how we can organize that for your organization. We also run half-day sessions where we talk to your technical teams and development teams, also business teams, about certain topics like OpenShift adoption, container adoption, or BPM as well. And then, of course, you heard a lot about open innovation labs today and the examples this morning from Heritage Bank. They are very good and very well suited as well in helping you to have a look at your applications and find the right strategies for you to update and to refresh your applications in that space. Okay, thank you very much.